Hey, welcome back. This is Jacob here. So, we've made it through the start menu, thank goodness. Let's get on to the actual game, or at least development of the game. First off, we're going to open up Unity. You're probably going to want to install it on the appropriate version and create a new project. New Unity project is just fine. I'll make it 2D just because I like 2D. It's easy to understand as well. And while we wait for Unity to create that, in game development, one important thing to know is that anything really is possible so long as you have sufficient knowledge and sufficient processing. Fortunately for modern game devs, we have some really good processors out there. So typically it's just going to be knowledge and experience that hold you back. Especially composers who really aren't familiar with Unity. It's what we're lacking from putting the coolest thing possible in the game. For now, at least, we're just going to talk about how game development works and how Unity works. When you're making a game, you need a couple things. First, you're going to need scripts. They're kind of specialized portions of logic that tell things what to do. It's really the brain behind your game, whereas the engine is the body. We are also going to need game objects, which are kind of a combination of scripts and art of any sort. So, for example, in the video game Mario is a game object. He combines the art and animation with a little bit of logic for his running and jumping and dying. Game objects also have custom physics. Typically, your games are going to involve some basic, like, gravity type thing, but it all depends on the game. Finally, we have UI elements, and pretty much all of the audio are put on the back burner. It's unfortunate, but that's really kind of how it should be. A game needs to be playable before it can be polished. That doesn't mean that audio and UI, user interface, for those of you unfamiliar, are insignificant. They really play an important role once you've got basic functionality in making your game polished and actually playable, So, let's look at how Unity organizes these. First off, we're going to take a trip to the inspector panel. Unity has a couple of different layouts here, so your panels might be scattered all over. Just try and find the ones that I'm pointing out to you. Additionally, you might notice that this version of Unity is dark. It's just because it's a different version than the one that you might have. So the inspector shows information on anything you click on pretty much. If you have some art or an object, like if you want to see, okay, how high can Mario jump, you would click on Mario, and then in the inspector, there would be a variety of variables. Most of the stuff that's showing up in here, you're not going to need to worry about, unless you want to customize something. Following, we have the hierarchy. This is just a really big list of objects. You can see we have a scene called Untitled, because this is a new scene, and in it we have a main camera. You can see when I clicked on the main camera, all of this extraneous information showed up in the inspector. Things like the position, the background color. Let's just change that to demonstrate. Really, the hierarchy is just to present all of the objects in the scene. So let's go next to the scene. This is kind of a map of all of the objects in your game. So if I wanted Mario to be here and a Koopa to be here, I could simply place them in here, and then they would show up in the hierarchy. The main camera, because it's already by default in, is right there in the center, and you can see the bounds of the camera. Finally, we have, well, not finally, but for now, finally, we have the project folder. This is where all of the stuff that could be in the game hangs out for a while before you actually put it into the hierarchy or the scene view. So these are things like music, which is important for us, or audio, art, and scripts, things like that. Pretty much everything in your whole project is going to be here, whereas this is just showing objects for this one scene. So Unity has two main ways of showing you how your project looks. It has this game view, which is a representation of what people will see when you hit this play button. The game starts and game view is active, and then when you hit play again, not pause, but play again, I don't know why, then it is no longer active. And we have the console. So the console kind of represents all of the technical elements to your game, and it's only going to tell you of its own volition if something is wrong, if it's really, really wrong. If there's something in your game that makes it fundamentally unplayable, then the console is going to say, whoa, slow down. There's going to be a big red circle here, and it'll say, you need to fix this before you move on. It revokes your playing privileges, so you no longer can play. Or it might complain to you during runtime once you've hit play if something goes wrong then. Contrarily, the game view is going to show you all of the potentially wrong logical issues in your game. So things like if you had inverted the gravity scale, for example, then your character, that's completely within the realm of possible things in Unity. Unity is not going to have an issue with that in the console log, but it will have an issue with it in the game, or at least you will, once you see that you hit play and your character drifts to the top of the screen. You're going to think, I didn't want that to happen. I need to fix that. So let's look at some specific audio options. Unity, or at least at how Unity organizes audio. Unity has kind of like a preset logic, some preset scripts that make audio a lot easier for people like us. If we click on our main camera here again and scroll down in the inspector, to remind you, the hierarchy shows objects in the scene. Once you've selected an object, it shows up in the inspector over here. So if we scroll down through all of this miscellaneous weird information that we know nothing about, look at that, bingo, the audio listener. Notice that it doesn't have a drop-down menu like the previous, like the camera, for example, which has a whole bunch of stuff that you can just ignore. The audio listener actually has nothing on it. It's really not configurable. So the audio listener does its job by just taking any audio within a scene and pulling it and sending it to headphones. It's not a really complex object. Contrarily, I'm going to go ahead, I right-clicked here, and I'm going to create an empty object. It's just named game object for now. Go figure, because it is a game object in the hierarchy. I'm going to add a component here. If we go to audio in this drop-down menu, look at that, an audio source, different from the audio listener. Now this one has a ton of stuff that we can customize here. But the first thing here is the audio clip. Right now, it's set to none. There is no audio clip. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my project window here, and I'm going to drag in a WAV file. So remember, the project panel is all about things that you want to put in your game. You're going to need to drag it into the project panel, add something to your project panel before you can really import it into the game. So I've clicked on our test audio here, and in the inspector we have a lot of options again. We have some load type stuff. We can force it to mono, load, and background, just stuff we probably don't need to worry about for the time being. I'm just explaining the fundamentals for now. So if we click back on our game object, information is shown in the inspector. Remember, we added a component. I'll go through this again. Under audio, we added this audio source, so now it is in the components section of the inspector. So I'll go ahead and look at this. Our WAV file dragged in with a nice fancy orange logo matching the audio source. So I'll drag this directly into this audio clip section. We have our test audio clip, And let's go through some settings here. First off, mute. Definitely important. I figure you can probably figure that one out on your own. In the same vein, loop is pretty intuitive. Play on awake, maybe not so much, but as you can see as you hover, Unity explains, play the sound when the scene loads. So, because we have play on awake enabled here, and we have an audio clip, as well as an audio listener, then when we hit play, hopefully we'll hear whatever this WAV file is. Wonderful. And we hit play again to stop playback. As a reminder, when you hit play, or actually, I guess this is new information, when you hit play, Unity will automatically transfer your view from scene view to game view, or at least to make sure that game view is visible. So if I hit play from here, it's going to want to show me what's going on in the actual game instead of what is being built in the scene, which remember is like a map of the game. I apologize if this information is really fundamental for people with experience in Unity. You can just skip ahead, but I wanted to give some background on, this type of thing. Additionally, in our options here, we have priority. Makes sense, it's pretty intuitive. It's just about how well you can hear something, just like volume, essentially, in a different sense. We have a volume meter here as well, go figure. Pitch, yes. Stereo pan. Spatial blend is probably the first one on this list that you don't quite have experience with, maybe not at least. It's a transition from 2D to 3D spatial blend, but it's actually on a meter from 0 to 1, which is interesting. So how this works is, if I have my game object, which I'm going to manipulate by selecting up here the plus arrows, I guess the translocator tool, I can move it within 2D space here in comparison to our camera. So if my spatialization, or my spatial blend, is at completely 3D, and I'm just going to bring our game tab over here, I hit play, you'll notice, first off, our pitch is a bit down, but our game object is very much to the left. And then it transitions completely to the right as I move the game object to the right. And as my spatialization, or my spatial blend goes down, then it returns to a standard stereo output. So these are at least the fundamentals of how Unity sends its audio. One last thing before we go. Our audio listener is really kind of idle here. So let's consider what would happen. We have one audio source and one audio listener. If we had two audio listeners, you might think, oh, two, it'll probably have something to do with a stereo output. Well, let's give it a shot here. We'll navigate down to audio, audio listener. We now have an audio listener on our game object as well as our main camera. To clarify, the main camera is also technically a game object. Let's see what happens when we hit play. We have nothing going wrong in console so far. Uh-oh. Unity is sort of throwing a fit here. There are two audio listeners in this scene. Please ensure that there's always exactly one audio listener in the scene. This is not a great error message considering it's playing essentially every frame of the game. It's going really fast, it's a whole ton, and it just floods your console here. Unity doesn't know how to handle a second audio listener because it's not really set up to have two sets of headphones or something like that. So it is going to blast this message until you fix the error, which is not a good thing if you're trying to, for example, edit someone else's game. If you leave two audio listeners in there, then Unity's not going to be complaining at you, it's going to be complaining at them for apparently hundreds and hundreds of frames, 228. I believe, right here. So that's about all I had to explain about the audio system in Unity. Let's jump right into our example project. Right here, this zip file, Start Menu Workshop, this is what you'll be downloading. You can see inside of it, we have 3 options. Workshop Example, exe, there's a big ol' how to use text file, and the data file. If you want to peer through the text file, feel free to do so, but for now we're just going to focus on these clip names. When you import audio into this project, what it's going to do is it's automatically going to set it inside of the game. I've created a project so that essentially you don't have to program at all. You just have to compose. It's a practice of composition and audio design. I say audio design because we also have a lot of other customizable options here. Rain, thunder, there's a click, there's a fancy click, so to speak, a sound for adjusting knobs, and a kind of ambient noise looped by an object in the scene. So before we worry too much about importing audio, let's just see how the project plays on its own. This game is called Taboo, and it's not actually a playable game, but it has a pretty fancy start menu here, as well as some options. You can see we have a lot of objects moving around in the scene. We have some rain, and there's an automated system to create thunder if you insert a thunder sound effect. We have several different menu options here. There's a nice little coolness meter at the bottom, and of course an option to quit. Really, this is just an interesting example of, or a chance for you to practice your composition in a setting that you're not familiar with. You have not heard a song for this game before. You've probably never seen this game before, I'd imagine. That's because I made it pretty quick for this setup here. But I want you to draw inspiration from the game to create something hopefully successful. One thing I'd advise is that you compose maybe 2 or 3 different soundtracks or 2 or 3 different sound effect setups so that you can experience different examples or different takes on the same project, and just practice honing your composition towards a specific goal with the game in mind. So I've got a little example audio folder here. I'll open that in a new window. Here's just a little tutorial about inserting these WAV files. They have to contain the correct name with the correct capitalization. You can see song here is exactly the same as song here, except with the .wav extension. If your audio files don't typically export as .waves, you're going to want to convert them. There are converters online, because this specific Unity example that I've set up will only read .wav files. So once I've imported all of these sounds by, except for the song, I think, and maybe the thunder, by just dragging them into the data file in the workshop, then they will automatically be read by the example as you play it. As you can hear, we have a rain sound effect. We have some interesting clicks for our menu options. And we have this ambient kind of drifting buzz sound that came from that dark thing as it wandered by. So, hopefully before next week you'll have the chance to look through this and give it a shot, or 1 or 2 yourself. Please, if you're interested, come to the next meeting and we'll show off, what each of us chose to interpret this game as. Have a nice week.